I practically raised my little brother while our parents were too busy to notice. Everyone said I was so mature, but they never saw the moment I finally stopped holding it all together. I was 8 years old the first time someone called me mature for my age. I remember it because it came from a teacher who said it with a kind smile, like it was a good thing, like it was some badge of honor. But what she did not know, what nobody really knew, was that I was not trying to be mature. I was just trying to keep the wheels from falling off at home. My little brother, Jake, was 4 then. Small, always sick with something, ear infections, asthma, croup, you name it. He had this mop of dark curls and the kind of big brown eyes that made teachers fall in love with him instantly. Me? I had thinning patience and a brain that worked overtime figuring out how to get us both out the door on time, while Mom was still passed out from another overnight shift and Dad was, well, wherever he was. There were mornings where I made peanut butter sandwiches for both of us and packed them into a lunch bag we shared. I used to cut the crusts off his because he said they made his mouth itch. I do not know if that was true or just something he heard on TV, but I did it anyway. I got him dressed, double-knotted his shoes, wiped his nose, and walked him to pre-K before I headed to class. My parents were not bad people exactly, just consumed. My mom worked nights as a nurse and came home like a ghost, silent and drained. My dad was in construction, but he spent more time nursing cheap beers in the garage than doing anything that resembled parenting. Some days he was there. Most days he was not. On the rare nights we were all home, we might eat spaghetti off paper plates and watch the local news until someone passed out on the couch. That was what family meant in our house, bare minimum and background noise. The thing is, Jake never knew anything was wrong. That was the whole point. I read to him at night when Mom forgot. I sat with him through croupy coughs, humidifiers blowing like train engines beside his bed. I did his laundry, helped him color inside the lines, taught him how to tie his shoes, went to his school play and clapped louder than anyone else when he mumbled his one line about a singing tree. People loved to say, "You are such a good big brother," like that was enough. Like that fixed anything. What they never asked was, "How are you doing?" No one ever asked that. And it just kept going. Through grade school, through middle school, I became the steady one, the reliable one, Jake's protector, tutor, cook, and part-time therapist before I had my own locker. Everyone said I was doing great. No one noticed I never got to just be a kid. But I did it anyway. Because I loved him. Because someone had to. Still, I never imagined how heavy it would all get. Or how alone I would feel when the cracks finally showed. And trust me, they did show. But that came later. Right now, I was still just a kid, trying to carry a life that was never built to fit on these small shoulders. And I was already starting to feel the strain. By the time I was 12, I had stopped thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. It was not some dramatic moment. I did not make some big decision. It just sort of faded. Like slowly turning down the volume on a song you used to love. I had other priorities. Jake was 8 by then, starting 3rd grade. That age where kids either start to float or sink in school. I made sure he floated. I sat with him every night, working through math problems and spelling lists while Mom snored with the TV on in the background and Dad was working late, which usually meant nursing beer somewhere else. Every time Jake brought home a good grade, my parents acted like he had cured a disease. "Look at that, smart kid," Dad would say, ruffling his hair. Mom would snap a photo, post it online with a caption like, "So proud of my little genius." And I would smile, even when she cropped me out of the frame. No one asked how Jake suddenly knew how to divide fractions. No one wondered who stayed up with him until midnight finishing his volcano project because someone forgot the baking soda. I stayed invisible by design. That was my job. Keep things running, keep him happy, and never, ever make it about me. I skipped out on parties, dropped out of the soccer team, stopped hanging with the few friends I had because Jake had a cold or forgot his lunch or needed help with something. And if I ever complained, even once, Mom would say something like, "He's your brother. You're supposed to help him." And I believed her. That was the thing, I believed her. I thought maybe if I just kept being helpful, maybe if I stayed steady, someone would notice. Maybe they would say, "You're doing too much," or "We're proud of you too." But that day never came. The more I gave, the more they expected. I remember once, in 7th grade, my science teacher pulled me aside. I thought maybe he was going to tell me I had done well on the project or that he liked my essay. But he just said, "You seem tired lately. Everything okay at home?" I told him I was fine. Because that is what strong kids say. I got used to being the one people leaned on. Jake leaned on me. Mom leaned on me. Dad ignored me. But even that felt like part of the job, being the one nobody had to worry about. And sure, sometimes I got tired. Sometimes I wanted to slam a door and say, I matter too. But I never did. Instead, I turned those feelings into fuel. I told myself, if I can keep Jake from feeling how empty this place really is, then it is worth it. That was the kind of love I had for him. Pure, unselfish, and blind. But the thing about being the strong one, no one ever checks if you are running on empty. And I was. More than anyone knew. I moved out at 19. Got a job at a tire shop just outside town. Nothing fancy, just enough to pay rent on a one-bedroom that smelled like old wood and dust. The kind of place with bad plumbing and worse insulation, but it was mine. I did not take much with me, just a duffel bag, my old PS2, and the guilt of leaving Jake behind. He was 15 then, starting high school. I still saw him most weekends, still called him after every test, still showed up to his games like clockwork. But it was not the same. Not for him. Not for me. He had started changing, getting louder, moodier. I chalked it up to being a teenager. But part of me wondered if he was angry at me for leaving. The truth was, I never really left. Not emotionally. I still kept track of his homework deadlines, reminded Mom when parent-teacher night was coming up, picked him up when Dad forgot, again. It was like I had just relocated my duties to a different address. Same weight, different room. But adulthood has a way of creeping in. Bills, work stress, loneliness. I was clocking in 50-hour weeks, coming home to microwave dinners and dead silence. Every so often I would look at myself in the mirror and ask, who are you when no one needs you? And I never had an answer. Most people get to build their lives in their 20s. Date around, try stuff, fail at things, figure it out. I did not get that. I was still playing support staff to a family that only called when something broke. Car troubles, school payments, rent due early. It was always something. And I kept saying yes. Because that is what I had always done. I remember one night, I got home late from work, covered in grease, back aching. I found a voicemail from Mom. Jake's having a rough week. Can you talk to him? He listens to you more than anyone. I sat there holding my phone, thinking, do I ever get to be the one who falls apart? Then I hit call back and patched him through his crisis like always. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was worried, because I was angry. And that scared me. I had never been angry at Jake before. Not really. But something had shifted. It was not just about him anymore. It was about me. My life. Or the lack of it. I had missed birthdays, lost relationships, turned down better jobs in other cities. All because I was still tethered to a role I had never asked for. And here was the truth I had been avoiding. I was not just tired. I was drowning. But nobody knew. Because I had spent so long pretending I could handle anything. Until one day, I couldn't. And that day came sooner than I thought. I do not remember the exact day it started. Just that it was quiet. Not some big explosion. More like a slow leak you do not notice until the room starts to flood. It was little things. I started showing up late to work. Could not focus. I would stare at the register, forgetting numbers I had known for years. My manager, Rick, asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired. He nodded. That was the end of it. I stopped answering calls from home. I let Jake's texts pile up. The guilt was instant, like always, but the exhaustion was louder. I would stare at my phone and think, not tonight. Just one night of silence. But one night turned into two. Then a week. Mom left a voicemail asking why I was being distant. Said Jake missed me. That he was applying for colleges and needed my help. I sat on my couch, surrounded by unopened mail and dirty dishes, and felt the weight of it settle deeper in my chest. They needed me again. And I had nothing left to give. People talk about burnout like it is something that only happens at work. But no one talks about what happens when your entire identity is built on holding everything together. When being the strong one is the only role you have ever played. I started sleeping through alarms, skipping meals. I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to move. I kept thinking, you are just tired. You always bounce back. But I wasn't bouncing. I was sinking. I remember one night, I walked into the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked hollow. Not just tired. Gone. It hit me like a punch. I did not recognize the guy staring back. That night, I did something I had never done before. I called Jake. He picked up on the third ring, his voice casual, like nothing was wrong. Yo, you alive? Haven't heard from you in days. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Just this lump in my throat. After a long pause, I said, I'm not okay. He laughed. You? Come on, man. You're always okay. That was the moment. Right there. That sentence, you're always okay, sliced me wide open. Because that was it, wasn't it? That was how everyone saw me. The one who never needed anything. The one who always came through. The one who carried the load, quietly, without question. And now, in the one moment I needed someone to see me, to hear me, he couldn't. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way, I ended the call early. Said I had to go. He probably thought nothing of it. Just another one of my strong and silent moments. But it was not. It was the start of something I could no longer hide. I was coming undone. And I was completely, painfully alone. It happened on a Tuesday, which feels unfair somehow. Tuesdays are supposed to be uneventful, forgettable. But that was the night everything I had been holding in finally broke loose. I had worked a double shift. The kind where you barely eat, your hands smell like rubber and oil, and you start talking to yourself just to stay awake. By the time I got home, I felt like a ghost walking through someone else's apartment. I dropped my jacket, kicked off my boots, and just stood there for a while, staring at the empty couch. There was a half-eaten sandwich on the counter, a pile of unopened mail, and this dull hum from the fridge that suddenly sounded way too loud. The kind of silence that makes your chest hurt. I thought about calling Jake again, maybe just to talk about nothing. But I knew how it would go. He would crack a joke, ask how I was doing. I would say fine, and that would be that. I sat on the floor, leaning against the fridge, and out of nowhere, I started crying. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. Just this quiet, ugly crying that sneaks up on you. I had no idea how long I sat there. My hands were shaking. My breathing felt heavy, like every inhale scraped my ribs. I was not crying about one thing, it was everything. The childhood I never got. The years I spent pretending I was strong. The way nobody ever asked if I needed help, because I made it look so easy. I was crying for the kid who grew up raising someone else's son. Somewhere in that haze, I got up and found this old photo on my bookshelf. It was me and Jake at his 8th birthday. He was grinning with frosting on his face, holding the lopsided cake I baked because Mom forgot to buy one. I looked at it for a long time, tracing the edges with my thumb. He looked happy. I looked exhausted, even then. 12 years old and already worn down. I remember thinking, you did your job. He turned out okay. But right after that came another thought, darker and quieter. At what cost? That night, I did not sleep. I just sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, trying to figure out when I had become the background character in my own life. Everyone always said I was the example. The good one. The dependable one. But that was just another way of saying I was easy to forget. The next morning, I called in sick. Rick said, take all the time you need, like he had said it before. But time was not what I needed. I needed someone, anyone, to see that I was drowning. No one did. Not that week. Not the next. And when Jake called a few days later, it was not to ask how I was doing. It was to ask for money. That was the moment something inside me quietly shattered. I told him I would call him back. But I didn't. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. It was almost 6 months before I heard from Jake again. 6 months of silence. I had quit the tire shop, picked up a night job at a warehouse, and spent my days half asleep, trying to convince myself that distance was a kind of healing. I told myself he had Mom and Dad. He would be fine without me. But late one night, around 2 in the morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me knew. I answered, voice groggy. On the other end was Jake. He sounded different, older somehow, but scared. His words came fast, all at once. He said he had been in a car accident. Nothing life-threatening, but his car was totaled. He was stranded an hour away, and Mom was asleep, Dad was out of town, and, his voice cracked, he did not know who else to call. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the floor, my heartbeat loud in my ears. It was like the universe was handing me a test I had already failed 1,000 times before. The same instinct kicked in, the old wiring. Get up, fix it, make it okay. But something stopped me. Not anger. Not revenge. Just emptiness. I wanted to move, but my legs would not listen. I looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I pictured him sitting on the side of some dark road, headlights streaming past, waiting for the brother who had never once let him down. And I didn't go. I told him I couldn't. Said my car was not working. Lied right through my teeth. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "Yeah, okay. Don't worry about it." I heard the disappointment in his voice. The kind I used to hear from Mom when I forgot to take the trash out. Only now I was the one letting him down. After the call ended, I sat there in the dark, the guilt flooding back like an old friend. But mixed with it was something else, relief. For the first time in my life, I had not rushed to save anyone. I had chosen myself, even if it made me hate myself for it. The next morning, I found out he had called a friend who picked him up. He was fine. Shaken, but fine. But things between us changed after that night. The call stopped. The texts faded to nothing. I told myself he was angry, and maybe he was. But deep down, I think he just saw me differently now. Not the unbreakable brother. Not the rescuer. Just a guy who had finally dropped the weight. Funny thing is, that should have felt freeing. It didn't. It felt like losing the only identity I ever had. And that was when the real crash happened. Not the one Jake had on the road, but the one I'd been steering toward my entire life without even knowing it. Because when you spend your whole existence being strong for others, you forget how to stand when no one's leaning on you. And I was about to fall hard. After Jake stopped calling, the silence felt heavier than any argument we could have had. I tried to fill it with noise, TV on all night, podcasts playing while I slept, anything to drown out the echo of his voice in my head. But it always crept back in. That tiny, tired, "Yeah, okay. Don't worry about it." The truth is, I was not fine either. I started missing work again. Got written up twice. My apartment turned into a mess of takeout boxes and unpaid bills. Every corner reminded me of something I had failed to fix. My family, my brother, myself. Then one afternoon, Mom called. First time in months. Her voice was soft, hesitant, the kind of tone she only used when she wanted something. She said Dad had been laid off. Construction site shut down. Money was tight. I could hear her trying to sound calm, but I could also hear the real reason she was calling. They needed help. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Every time my life fell apart, they appeared, not to check on me, but to pull from whatever scraps I had left. I told her I could not help this time, that I was barely making rent, that I was tired. There was a pause on the line. Then she said it, quiet but sharp. "You have always been dramatic." I hung up. That word, dramatic, echoed in my head all night. As if everything I had carried since childhood was just some performance. As if stepping into the role of a parent at 8 years old had been voluntary. The next day, I got another call. Not from Mom this time, from a neighbor back home. She said my dad had collapsed in the garage. Heart issue. He was in the hospital. I went. Of course I did. Because that is who I was. The dependable one. The fixer. Even when it hurt. Seeing him in that hospital bed was strange. He looked smaller than I remembered. We barely talked. The machines beeped softly in the background, filling the space between us. Mom sat on the other side of the bed, staring at her phone like it held the answers to a life she did not understand. Later that night, while I was getting coffee from the vending machine, a nurse stopped me. She asked if I was the eldest son. I nodded. Then she told me something that knocked the air out of my lungs. She said my father's heart problem had been going on for months, maybe even a year. He had skipped his appointments, ignored every warning. The doctor had told him to slow down, to take it easy, but he refused, said he couldn't rest yet. And then she said, "He mentioned you." Apparently, he told them I was the reason he had kept pushing, that he wanted to prove to me he could still be the strong one, that he could finally carry the family again. For a second, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. After all these years, after every night I stayed awake making sure we survived, he wanted to prove himself to me. I went back into that room, stood beside his bed, and felt everything inside me twist. Anger, love, grief, confusion. He never woke up again. At the funeral, Jake stood across from me. He barely looked my way. We did not speak. And when everyone else went home, I stayed behind. I sat there long after the sun went down, staring at the dirt and realizing something I had spent my whole life avoiding. I had been trying to save a family that never learned how to save themselves. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to save me. After the funeral, the house felt even emptier than before. Mom stayed upstairs most days, curtains drawn, TV whispering some talk show to no one. She spoke in half sentences now, the kind that ended in sighs. Jake handled things the only way he knew how, by leaving. He packed a duffel, Said he had a job offer in another state and drove off the morning after we buried Dad. He didn't even look at me when he closed the door. I watched his taillights vanish down the same street where I used to walk him to school. It felt poetic in a cruel way. I had spent my entire life making sure he never felt alone, and now he was the one who left me behind. Weeks turned into months. I moved back into my apartment, tried to rebuild some kind of routine. The warehouse job was gone by then, replaced by whatever odd work I could find: painting, delivery shifts, unloading trucks. It was not about ambition anymore. It was about motion. As long as I kept moving, maybe I would not have to feel. Then, one night, Jake called. I almost didn't pick up. My thumb hovered over the screen for a full minute before I answered. His voice was calm. Too calm. He said, "Hey, I just wanted to check in." It felt like small talk at first. Weather, work, nothing heavy. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, I used to tell people you were my hero?" That stopped me cold. I waited for the punchline, but there wasn't one. He kept talking. Said that after I left home, he tried to copy me. Tried to be the strong one. Said it looked easy when I did it. So he figured he could handle it too. But it wasn't easy. It ate him alive. Then came the part that twisted the knife. He told me he had been in therapy for a few months, something I never thought he'd do. And in those sessions, he realized he resented me. Said he grew up feeling like he owed me everything. That it made him feel small. That my constant saving made him weak. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He went on, saying he needed space, that he forgave me, but he didn't want to go back to how he used to be. Said he had to build his own life now, on his own terms. When the call ended, I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. I wanted to hate him, to scream, "You have no idea what I gave up for you." But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew he was right. I had been so obsessed with protecting him from the emptiness, I felt that I never let him face his own. I thought love meant carrying someone until they were safe. But maybe all it did was teach him how to walk with a limp. The irony burned. All those years I spent trying to be everything for everyone. And in the end, the person I raised wanted nothing to do with me. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the city lights blur through the rain, and realized something brutal. Jake had finally learned to stand on his own, and I was the one left crawling. It happened on another sleepless night. Not dramatic, not loud, just one of those long, gray hours when the city feels half dead and your own thoughts start echoing too loud. I was sitting on the floor beside the couch, back against the wall, eating cold noodles out of the container because I could not bring myself to wash a dish. There was this steady hum from the refrigerator, the same one I had cried next to months before, and for a second, it almost felt like time had looped back around. Same noise, same silence, same me. Only now, I did not have the energy to even pretend I was fine. My phone buzzed, a message from a number I did not recognize. It was Jake's therapist. She said he had mentioned me during a session, that he worried about how I was doing, and asked if I was open to talking. For a long time, I just stared at the message. My first instinct was to ignore it. That old, automatic reflex, push it down, fix it alone. But I couldn't. Not this time. I called the number. My voice cracked before I got a full sentence out. She did not ask a lot of questions. Just said, "You sound tired." I told her I was. Then I told her everything. The words poured out like I had been holding my breath for 20 years. I told her about being 8 years old and tying Jake's shoes, about missed birthdays and invisible report cards, about how every compliment I ever got came attached to someone else's name. I told her I felt like I had lived my whole life as a shadow in someone else's story. And when I finally stopped talking, she said something that hit me like a wave. She said, "You were never supposed to be their glue. You were supposed to be their child." No one had ever said that to me before. I do not think anyone ever will again in a way that lands quite like that did. That night, I made an appointment to start therapy myself. It felt weird at first, like I was betraying the version of me that had always handled things alone. But slowly, it started to make sense. I began remembering things I had buried. The mornings when I wanted to stay in bed but got up anyway. The nights I felt invisible but smiled through it. The years I convinced myself that exhaustion was love. It took months, but I started rebuilding piece by piece. I got a new job at a hardware store, small place with quiet people and short hours. I bought real groceries. Learned to cook something that did not come in a box. I started walking at night instead of sitting by the window. And one evening, I finally sent Jake a message. Nothing heavy. Just, I hope you are okay. I am trying to be too. He replied a few minutes later. Good. Keep trying. No drama. No closure. Just truth. And for once, that was enough. Because for the first time in my life, I was not trying to save anyone. I was just trying to live. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. And one last test was still waiting for me. It was raining again the day I finally broke my silence with Mom. I had not planned to go. I was just walking, hands in my pockets, no destination in mind, when I found myself on the sidewalk outside her house. The porch light was off, the windows dim. It looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight had shifted now that Dad was gone and Jake was off starting his own life. I knocked. No answer. I thought maybe I would leave. But something told me to try the door. It was unlocked. She was in the kitchen, sitting in the same spot she used to fall asleep in during her overnight shifts. Only now, she looked tired in a different way, like grief had peeled back whatever was left of her energy and left nothing underneath. She looked up when she saw me. Her eyes went wide, then wary. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I sat down across from her. The silence was thick at first. Then I told her the truth. I told her I had spent my entire life trying to keep this family from falling apart. That I had played every role: big brother, father, husband, janitor, peacekeeper, except the one I should have had: son. I said I was tired of being the strong one, that I needed help, and no one had ever offered it. Not once. She just stared at me for a long time. Then her eyes filled, and she whispered, "I did not know." And she meant it. That was the worst part. She genuinely did not know. Because I never showed it. I never cried in front of her. Never yelled. Never failed in a way that forced them to look. I had done such a good job pretending I was fine that they believed it. So I told her one more thing, that I did not regret raising Jake. I never had. But I understood now that I should not have had to. And then, for the first time since I was a child, I let myself cry in front of my mother. She reached across the table. Her hands were shaking. So were mine. We did not fix everything that day. Some things stay broken. But we started talking, really talking, for the first time in years. I left a few hours later, soaked from the rain, but lighter. Not because she fixed anything. Because I finally stopped pretending I was unbreakable. Months passed. Jake and I exchanged a few texts here and there. Not much, but enough to know we were both still out there, breathing, rebuilding. And one night, sitting in my apartment, with clean dishes in the sink and warm food in the oven, I realized something I had never let myself believe. I was allowed to rest. I was allowed to fall apart. And more importantly, I was allowed to be loved without earning it through sacrifice. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot be a lighthouse for everyone else if your foundation is cracked. And strength? Real strength? It is not about never breaking. It is about knowing when to say, I need someone, too. I still do not know where Jake and I will end up. Maybe we will grow close again. Maybe not. But one thing I do know, next time someone says, "You're such a good example," I will say thank you. And I will ask them something I wish someone had asked me all those years ago. How are you really doing? Because even the strongest deserve to be held. Even me.